Hey Trio, welcome back. So today we're going to be going over how do you know what is significant. So when you're looking at numbers, there are some important rules that you want to keep in mind. Some of them being, like for one, if there is a trailing number, it is not significant. So an example that we can have here is this one here. So you see 0.000335. These numbers coming before are not significant. So looking at this number, we can say that this number has 3 significant figures. And you can just write SF, just to abbreviate that. A second rule, the trailing zeros, they're significant only if there's a decimal place. For example, here, number 10, we have 84.10000. If we see here, these zeros are significant. So if we're rounding this correctly, we're going to have 7 significant figures. Okay, so here's another one, number 12. Some people might look at this and they will say, oh, well, are these significant? And they might just say, oh, let's throw this in there. If that is not there before you start the problem, these are not significant, and throwing in that decimal place will throw off your results. You have to remember, when you're looking at the question, the final answer will be based on what they put in print. So looking at this one, there's a third rule that now falls into place. The numbers in between, if it's a whole number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's always going to be significant, but the zeros in between, they will be significant and they're sandwiched between one of those numbers. So with this number, we're going to have 5 significant figures. And that leads me to testing out the leading zeros. 35,000. This one is correct to 2 significant figures because there is no decimal place. You have to keep that one in mind. If that decimal place was there, then it would be 5 significant figures. So now looking at this one here, 0.0035. If you look at this one correctly, it'll be correct to 2 significant figures because although there is a decimal place, these are leading zeros, and leading zeros are never significant, whether there's a decimal point or not. And if it's following the decimal point, it is not significant if it becomes before these whole numbers. So now, looking at this number, 30,500, we see that there are trailing zeros, but there's no decimal place, so we're not going to consider these significant. But the 0 in between the 3 and the 5 here, it is sandwiched between those whole numbers, so we will consider that significant. So looking at this number, we will see that there are 3 significant figures. So leading us here, 30,050. Now, it's kind of like this one, except now there's 2 zeros in between the 3 and the 5. And since they're sandwiched between that whole number, they are significant, while this one, there's no decimal point, so it is not significant. So looking at this number, we are going to have 4 significant figures. Okay, so now looking at number 5, we have 3.5 thousand. Looking at these zeros, the key that you'll be looking at for here is that decimal point. And since it's already there, we know that these trailing zeros are going to be significant. So looking at this number, we'll know that it has 5 significant figures. Okay. So now we're going to looking at this number, 10,082. So we know that these whole numbers are significant, and we know based on our previous rules that the zero sandwich in between the whole numbers are significant. So looking at this number, we know that everything here is going to be significant. So we can clearly say that this one has 5 significant figures. Okay, now leading us to 0.0025. Again, some might look at that and say, oh, there's a decimal point and there's trailing zeros. But you have to keep in mind, it's not the trailing zeros after the decimal point, it's the trailing zeros after the final whole number. So looking at this one, we're going to have 2 significant figures. And also keep in mind, leading zeros are never significant. So we have here 70 million. We see here that there's all these zeros, but there is not a single decimal point. So this one, we can only say has 1 significant figure. And that leads us now to our number 11. which is going to be 50,010. And so, some might look at this and go, wow, there's so many zeros. But just keep in mind, it's not a rush. Take your time and think of all of the rules. Eventually, they'll come to you without even having to think about it. So, number one, what we're going to look for is this decimal point. That tells us that all the numbers after the whole number are significant. And then also, we keep in mind all of the zeros between those whole numbers, the sandwich of it, those are also significant. So with this one, we can confidently say that every number is significant. So we can put that as 8 significant figures. Okay, so that leads us to our last problem, number 13. We see that this one is 5,000. And some might look at that and go, okay, there's a decimal point. There's the whole number, there's a leading number. Some might go, okay, will this just be 5,000 or should I do it 5,000.0? Because a lot of people, they like it to look nice. They want to see that zero. They don't want to see that point just trailing there with nothing following. You cannot add your own numbers. That will throw off your result. So looking at this, we know that this one is correct to 4 significant figures. Okay, so keep those rules in mind and remember, don't rush, take your time, and you will surely get the correct answer. Go Trio!